She built walls of ice to survive, yet one unexpected glance threatened an avalanche within her controlled world. Elena Vance commanded empires, her heart shielded by frost, but beneath her penthouse sanctuary, a different kind of life flourished, messy, warm, and embodied by the gardener whose quiet existence sparked a forbidden heat she couldn't extinguish. Hello, and a warm welcome. I'm Morgan, your storyteller. If you crave romance that defies expectation, real love born from vulnerability, and soul-stirring connections that linger long after the last word, you're exactly where you belong. This unforgettable journey of thawing hearts begins now. Subscribe so you don't miss a single transformative moment. Let's dive in. Chapter 1. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Elena Vance's penthouse, turning the glittering cityscape below into a smeared watercolor of gray and gold. Inside, the silence was absolute, profound, broken only by the metronome tick of the Breguet clock on the mantelpiece, a sound that usually anchored her, a reminder of precision and control. Tonight, it felt like the hammering of a tiny, relentless judge. The air smelled faintly of ozone from the storm, and the sterile scent of professionally laundered linen, a scent as devoid of life as the stark, minimalist perfection surrounding her. Elena stood motionless in the center of the vast living room, a sculpture carved from obsidian and ice. Her tailored ivory silk blouse and charcoal trousers were impeccable, her posture ramrod straight, yet a fine tremor vibrated deep within her core. The engagement ring, a cold, perfect emerald-cut diamond that had never truly felt like hers, lay discarded on the cold marble coffee table, winking malevolently under the recessed lighting. Beside it, half hidden by a sleek chrome sculpture, peeked the glossy corner of a bridal magazine. Spring florals for the modern bride. The irony tasted like ash. He chose her. The thought wasn't a scream, but a shard of ice driven into her gut. Robert, safe, predictable Robert, 10 years her junior, a rising star in her own legal department, chosen for his amenable nature and lack of complication, or so she'd thought. He hadn't chosen complication, he'd chosen youth, a bubbly intern whose laughter echoed too loudly in the hushed corridors of Vance Industries. He'd chosen simplicity, and he'd told her, with a patronizing pat on her hand that had made her skin crawl, that she was too much, too intense, too demanding, too formidable. The humiliation was a live wire, sizzling beneath her skin. She, Elena Vance, architect of a billion-dollar empire, feared negotiator, a woman whose very name commanded silence in boardrooms, had been discarded, like yesterday's financial report. The sterile perfection of her penthouse, her sanctuary, her meticulously constructed fortress, suddenly felt like a gilded cage. The cool marble under her bare feet wasn't grounding, it was frigid. The curated modern art on the walls seemed abstractly mocking. She needed air, space that wasn't curated, silence that wasn't oppressive. She moved towards the expansive balcony, the automatic glass doors sliding open silently. The roar of the rain and the city rushed in, a chaotic symphony, replacing the suffocating quiet. The damp wind whipped strands of her meticulously pinned hair loose, lashing them against her sharp cheekbones. She gripped the cold, wet railing, knuckles whitening, staring out blindly. Below, 30 stories down, the city pulsed with indifferent life. Headlights cut through the downpour, neon signs bled color onto slick streets. Life went on. Hers felt fractured. Her gaze, usually scanning horizons for threats or opportunities, drifted downward, pulled by an unexpected splash of color and movement. Below her balcony, separated by the sheer drop and the building's tiers, was a lower-level terrace, a private slice of green chaos clinging to the urban cliff face. It belonged to the new occupant of the corner unit below, a unit she vaguely recalled her efficient assistant mentioning was leased to a landscape architect, Leo Hart. And there he was. He stood in the deluge, seemingly impervious, dressed in faded jeans and a worn gray t-shirt plastered to his torso by the rain. Sandy hair, darkened to gold-brown by the water, was plastered to his forehead, escaping in unruly waves. He wasn't fleeing the storm, he was tending to it. His movements were unhurried, fluid, almost meditative, as he shifted large terracotta pots laden with vibrant blooms, crimson geraniums, purple petunias, something trailing with tiny white stars, towards the relative shelter of the overhang. Mud streaked his forearms, caked under his fingernails, yet there was a reverence in the way his large, capable hands cradled a fragile seedling, sheltering it from the worst of the downpour with his own body. He hummed, a low, wordless melody swallowed by the rain's roar, but visible in the relaxed line of his shoulders, the tilt of his head. Elena watched, transfixed. The sheer ease of him, his uncomplicated connection to the sodden earth and the struggling plants, was a physical blow. It was the antithesis of everything she was, everything her world demanded. He wasn't strategizing quarterly profits or fending off hostile takeovers. He was ensuring petunias didn't drown. His focus was absolute, unself-conscious. Sunlight, when it occasionally speared through the storm clouds, caught the droplets on his skin, turning freckles across his nose and shoulders into constellations. He looked alive, vibrantly, messily, unapologetically alive. A profound ache bloomed in Elena's chest, a yearning so sharp it stole her breath. Not desire, not yet, it was envy. Envy for his unguarded peace, his simple purpose, his ability to find solace in dirt and rain while her own world, built on steel and calculation, crumbled around her. She became a silent, unseen observer, perched high above his small Eden. Days passed. The raw wound of Robert's betrayal began to scab over with layers of icy resolve and punishing work schedules. Yet, the ritual began. Every evening, drawn by a force she refused to name, Elena would step onto her balcony. Below, Leo Hart became a fixture in her downward gaze. She watched him water his jungle with a hose that arced rainbows in the late afternoon sun. She saw him painstakingly train a jasmine vine along a trellis, his fingers gentle on the green tendrils. She witnessed the quiet smile he offered the elderly woman who delivered his groceries, a smile that crinkled the corners of his startlingly blue eyes, eyes the color of a clear alpine lake, unsettlingly direct and kind. He moved with a grounded grace, muscles flexing under sun-kissed skin as he hauled bags of soil, sweat tracing glistening paths down his temple. He represented a warmth, a genuineness, a realness that was alien, unsettling, and yet a balm to the sterile numbness threatening to consume her. Watching him became a secret, shameful indulgence, a stolen moment of color in her monochrome existence. 1 week after the fracture, the pressure cooker inside Elena finally exploded. A late-night call from Tokyo had gone disastrously wrong, a potential merger crumbling due to unforeseen complications. The board's thinly veiled scrutiny felt like lasers on her skin. The ghost of Robert's pitying gaze seemed to follow her through the echoing penthouse. The silence was no longer profound, it was screaming. She needed something. Noise, distraction, oblivion, anything to shatter the suffocating ice. She found a half-forgotten bottle of expensive Bordeaux in her climate-controlled cellar, a relic from a corporate dinner. Normally she savored such vintages. Tonight she poured a large glass and drank it like water, the complex flavors lost on her numb palate. Then another. The alcohol was a slow fuse, burning through her carefully constructed defenses. The ticking clock became an accusation. The minimalist art sneered. The discarded bridal magazine seemed to glow in the dim light. Too much. Driven by a desperate, uncharacteristic impulse, she grabbed a lightweight cashmere wrap, absurd against the storm still raging outside, and left the penthouse. The private elevator descended with smooth, silent speed. She didn't think. She just moved, propelled by the cheap wine thrumming in her veins and the raw, ragged edges of her humiliation. She needed not to be Elena Vance. Even for a moment, she needed to feel something other than this crushing, icy void. The lobby was deserted at this hour, polished marble reflecting the dimmed security lights. Rain drummed a frantic rhythm on the glass entrance. She pushed through the heavy doors, the wind immediately snatching her breath and whipping the cashmere wrap around her like a useless flag. Rain plastered her silk blouse to her skin in seconds, icy needles against her collarbone. She stood on the covered entrance step, shivering violently, the city's roar and the downpour overwhelming her senses. Where was she going? What was she doing? Logic abandoned her. Driven only by a memory of warmth glimpsed from above, she turned left instead of right, heading not towards the street but deeper into the building's residential wing. She found herself standing before a door, marked with the number of the corner unit below hers. The terrace garden unit. Leo Hart. Before she could second-guess this monumental lapse in judgment, before her formidable control could reassert itself through the alcoholic haze, she raised a trembling hand and knocked. The sound was feeble against the storm. The door opened almost immediately, as if he'd been nearby. Leo Hart stood silhouetted in the warm golden light spilling from within. He was barefoot, wearing worn jeans and a soft-looking dark green Henley pushed up to his elbows. A faint scent of turpentine and something earthy, damp wool perhaps, emanated from him. His sandy hair was tousled, his expression one of open surprise that quickly morphed into concern as he took in the sight of her. "Miss Vance?" His voice was deeper than she expected, warm and resonant, cutting through the drumming rain. Those lake blue eyes scanned her drenched state, the shivers racking her usually impervious frame, the wildness barely contained in her dark amber eyes. There was no judgment in his gaze, only startled curiosity and immediate kindness. "Are you all right? Come in, you're soaked through." He stepped back, holding the door wide. The warmth radiating from his apartment was an almost physical force, pulling her in. Elena hesitated for a fraction of a second, mortification warring with the bone-deep chill and the desperate need for shelter.
not just from the rain. Her usual defenses were waterlogged, dissolved by cheap Bordeaux and cheaper heartbreak. She stumbled forward, crossing the threshold into another world. Chaos. Controlled, vibrant chaos. That was her first impression. The air was thick with the sweet, heady scent of night-blooming jasmine, mingling with turpentine, oil paint, and something warm and comforting, chamomile. Books were stacked haphazardly on shelves, and a worn leather armchair. Sketchpads lay open on a scarred wooden table, revealing intricate pencil drawings of leaves and cityscapes. Canvases leaned against walls, some finished landscapes bursting with color, others abstract smears. Potted plants thrived everywhere, ferns unfurling, succulents perched on windowsills, a small orange tree in a terracotta pot. It was the absolute antithesis of her sterile penthouse. It was lived in, it was alive. She stood dripping on a woven rug, suddenly acutely aware of her absurdity. The CEO of Vance Industries, dripping rainwater onto a landscape architect's rug at nearly midnight, reeking of expensive failure and cheap wine. Her carefully constructed persona lay in tatters at her feet. "Here," Leo said softly, breaking the awkward silence. He hadn't moved closer, respecting the invisible sodden barrier around her. He held out a large, fluffy, oatmeal-colored towel. "Get dry, please." His gaze was steady, concerned, utterly devoid of the sycophancy or wariness she was accustomed to. Elena took the towel, her fingers brushing his. The contact was brief, electric. His skin was warm, slightly rough. She wrapped the towel around her shoulders, its coarse texture grounding, its warmth seeping into her chilled skin. The scent of clean cotton and something uniquely him, cedarwood and sunshine, enveloped her. She avoided his eyes, focusing on the rivulets of water tracing paths down her arms onto the rug. "Can I get you something? Tea? Coffee?" he offered, his voice still low, calm. He moved towards a small open kitchen area, giving her space. "I was just brewing some chamomile. Helps me unwind." He gestured vaguely towards an easel holding a half-finished, moody cityscape painting. Chamomile. Elena heard herself rasp, the word unfamiliar on her tongue. Tea was for board meetings, sharp and caffeinated. Chamomile sounded soft, weak, yet the thought of its warmth was suddenly all-consuming. He nodded, bussying himself with a chunky ceramic mug. She watched his back, the play of muscle under the soft fabric of his Henley, as he poured hot water from a kettle. He moved with that same grounded ease she'd observed from afar, utterly comfortable in his own space. He brought the mug over, steam curling gently from its surface, and placed it carefully on the low coffee table near the worn leather sofa. The scent of chamomile bloomed in the air, sweet and calming. "Sit," he suggested gently, nodding towards the sofa. "Get warm." He retreated again, leaning against the doorframe leading to what looked like a small studio space filled with more canvases and gardening tools, giving her a wide berth. He didn't pry. He didn't ask why the formidable Elena Vance was dripping on his rug at midnight. He simply offered quiet shelter and warmth. The silence stretched, thick but not uncomfortable. It was filled with the drumming rain on his terrace windows, the soft hiss of the radiator, the faint ticking of an old-fashioned clock on the wall, a comforting sound, unlike the accusatory tick of her breguet. Elena sank onto the edge of the sofa, the leather sighing softly beneath her. She clutched the towel tighter, the warmth seeping deeper, battling the internal chill. She sipped the chamomile tea. It was surprisingly pleasant, floral and soothing, spreading a gentle heat through her chest. The simple act of holding the warm mug, the rough texture of the towel, the vibrant, messy life surrounding her. It was an assault on her senses, a balm on her raw nerves. She risked a glance at him. He was looking out at the rain-lashed terrace, his profile thoughtful, hands shoved deep into his pockets. The warm light caught the gold strands in his hair, the line of his stubbled jaw. There was a quiet strength in his stillness, an unassuming solidity. He wasn't intimidated. He was present. A wave of exhaustion, deeper than fatigue, washed over her. The weight of the humiliation, the pressure, the relentless need for control, the sheer loneliness of her perch atop Vance Industries. It crashed down. The chamomile warmth, his unexpected kindness, the sheer normalcy of this messy, warm space. It cracked something brittle deep inside the ice fortress she'd spent decades building. A sob, harsh and choked, ripped from her throat before she could strangle it. She clapped a hand over her mouth, eyes wide with horror, staring straight ahead, mortification burning her cheeks hotter than any fever. She had never lost control like this, not in front of anyone. She felt him move, a subtle shift in the air. He didn't come closer, didn't try to touch her. He simply stood, a silent, solid presence in the doorway. His stillness wasn't indifference, it was profound understanding. It was an anchor offered in the storm. He didn't offer platitudes. He didn't fill the silence with awkward questions. He simply was. His quiet presence, the absence of judgment, the simple act of bearing witness to her broken moment without flinching, was more comforting than any words could have been. The sobs subsided into shaky breaths. She kept her face averted, staring into the depths of her mug, the chamomile blossoms swirling like tiny drowned suns. The silence stretched again, but the tension had shifted. The unspeakable had happened. She had cracked, and he had seen it. Yet, the world hadn't ended. The warmth of the mug, the the rough towel, the scent of jasmine and turpentine, his quiet, steady presence. It held her together more effectively than her own iron will had managed in weeks. Minutes bled into each other. The rain eased slightly, its drumming softening to a steady patter. Her shivering subsided, replaced by a bone-deep weariness and a creeping sense of surrealism. What was she doing here? This was madness, dangerous, unbecoming. The CEO couldn't be found weeping on a junior resident's sofa. Her voice was rough, unused. She cleared her throat. I should go. She couldn't look at him. Are you sure? His voice was gentle, still holding that calm neutrality. The rain's still heavy. You're welcome to wait it out. No, the word was sharp, a reflex. She stood abruptly, the towel slipping from her shoulders. She caught it, clutching it like a shield. Thank you. She gestured vaguely at the towel, the mug still steaming on the table, the tea, the shelter. The words felt inadequate, ridiculous. He simply nodded, pushing himself off the doorframe. Of course, anytime. There was no hidden meaning, no sly implication, just a simple statement of fact, offered with that unsettling sincerity. He walked her to the door, maintaining a respectful distance. Elena avoided his eyes, focusing on the worn grain of the wood floor. She paused on the threshold, the cool air from the corridor hitting her damp clothes. She didn't know what to say. An apology felt wrong. An explanation was impossible. She finally met his gaze, a quick darting glance. His blue eyes held only kindness, and a quiet concern that felt like a physical touch. "Good night, Miss Vance," he said softly. "Good night, Mr. Hart," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. She fled down the corridor towards the elevators, the damp towel still clutched in her hand like a guilty secret. The scent of his apartment, jasmine, turpentine, cedar, chamomile, clinging to her skin and hair, a haunting reminder of warmth offered and vulnerability exposed. The fortress walls hadn't just been breached, a single treacherous crack had appeared, and through it, an impossible forbidden warmth had begun to seep in. The sculpture had felt the sun, and the ice had begun to melt.
Chapter 2. The sterile perfection of Elena Vance's penthouse felt more like a sarcophagus than a sanctuary in the days following her disastrous, wine-soaked pilgrimage downstairs. The oatmeal-colored towel, laundered to impersonal softness by her housekeeper, lay folded with military precision on her pristine guest bathroom counter, a silent, damning monument to her lapse. The scent of Leo Hart's apartment, jasmine, turpentine, cedar, and the ghost of chamomile seemed to have woven itself into the very fibers of her cashmere wrap, lingering stubbornly despite professional cleaning. It was a phantom warmth that mocked the glacial atmosphere she was desperately trying to rebuild. Control. It was the bedrock of her existence, the invisible architecture holding Elena Vance together. She wielded it in the boardroom like a scalpel, in negotiations like a broadsword, over her own emotions like an iron vice. That night in Leo's chaotic, welcoming apartment had felt like falling into a warm, treacherous sea. She'd gasped, flailed, and exposed the terrified creature beneath the obsidian armor. It was unacceptable, mortifying, dangerous. Her strategy was simple: rebuild the fortress, brick by emotional brick, higher and thicker than before. She doubled down. Dawn found her already at her desk in the Vance Industries Tower, the city sprawling below her like a circuit board yet to be activated. The sharp tang of ink and the acrid bite of overbrewed coffee replaced the phantom scent of jasmine. She demanded reports earlier. Meetings ran longer. Her critiques became diamond-edged. Her staff moved through the hushed corridors like ghosts, exchanging wary glances. The silence in her office wasn't profound. It was suffocating, thick with unspoken tension. The view, once a symbol of her dominion, now felt isolating, a reminder of the dizzying height from which she could fall. Avoidance became her mantra. She timed her arrivals and departures from the residential building with tactical precision, scanning the lobby through the elevator's reflective doors before stepping out. She used the private garage entrance exclusively. Her balcony, once a neutral observation post, became enemy territory. She drew the automated blinds, shutting out the vibrant splash of color that was Leo Hart's terrace garden below. Out of sight, out of mind, or so she told herself. The universe, however, seemed perversely intent on thwarting her icy resolve. The building itself became a minefield of potential encounters. One crisp Tuesday morning, stepping out of the private elevator into the main lobby, crisp in a tailored navy suit that felt like armor, her path intersected with his. He was exiting the main elevator bank, dressed in worn khakis and a soft green t-shirt that made his eyes look impossibly blue, smelling overwhelmingly of fresh-cut grass and damp earth. He carried a canvas bag bulging with what looked like gardening tools. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice warm, breaking the lobby's marble stillness. He offered a hesitant smile, genuine and open, crinkling the corners of those lake blue eyes. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, catching the gold strands in his sandy hair, turning the fine dusting of freckles across his nose into tiny constellations. Elena froze mid-stride. The scent of him, grass, earth, sunshine, hit her like a physical force, a wave of forbidden warmth crashing against her carefully constructed ice wall. Her pulse, that traitorous drum, kicked against her ribs. She managed the barest nod, her gaze skittering past him to focus on the gleaming concierge desk. "Mr. Hart," she acknowledged, her voice clipped, devoid of inflection, the tone she reserved for underperforming junior executives. She swept past him, her heels clicking a sharp, deliberate rhythm on the marble, radiating an aura of impenetrable chill. Yet, as she pushed through the heavy glass doors into the city bustle, the scent of cut grass clung to the air she'd passed through, a lingering, unsettling reminder, and she was acutely, painfully aware of the flush she felt creeping up her neck. The near misses continued. She'd step into the elevator, catching a fading whiff of his cedarwood shampoo. She'd find a single, perfect, deep purple iris lying anonymously on the small table beside her penthouse door one evening. No note, just the vibrant bloom, its velvety petals soft against her fingertips, its subtle, spicy scent, a quiet intrusion into her sterile foyer. She left it there for a day, a silent accusation of vulnerability, before finally placing it in a slender vase of water on her stark kitchen counter. It looked absurdly alive, defiantly beautiful amidst the chrome and granite. She found herself glancing at it while making her morning espresso, a tiny, unwelcome spark of something fluttering in her chest. Obsession, she told herself firmly, a bizarre psychological rebound. Robert's betrayal had left a void, and her subconscious was latching onto the nearest source of perceived kindness and warmth. Leo Hart was simply convenient, an employee. Effectively, he leased the apartment, didn't he? That put him beneath her notice, an outsider to her world of high-stakes finance and ruthless strategy, and impossibly, infuriatingly pure. His life was dirt and plants and messy canvases. Hers was billions, and boardrooms, and calculated risks. They inhabited different solar systems. Yet the pull was undeniable, a constant hum beneath her skin, a low-grade fever that refused to break. Her carefully regimented mind began to betray her. During tedious conference calls, her gaze would drift towards the now-closed blinds, imagining the flecks of muscle in Leo's forearm as he pruned a rosebush, the way sweat might trace a path down his temple in the afternoon sun. The memory of his hand brushing hers when he offered the towel sent an illicit shiver down her spine. She craved the chaos of his space, the uncomplicated warmth, the absence of judgment she'd felt that rain-lashed night. It was a terrifying hunger, a craving for sunlight that threatened to melt her from the inside out. She doubled down again. Punishing spin classes replaced her usual measured workouts. She attended industry galas with glacial poise, a queen surveying her domain, her beauty a weapon of sharp angles and cold elegance. She accepted a date with a polished, predictable hedge fund manager, safe, boring Charles, and spent the entire evening comparing his calculated charm to Leo's unsettling sincerity, finding Charles utterly lacking. She left early, pleading a headache that wasn't entirely feigned, the phantom scent of turpentine and jasmine haunting her all the way home. The building's annual charity gala loomed, a glittering necessity Elena usually navigated with detached efficiency. This year it felt like a gauntlet. She knew Leo would be involved. The building manager had enthusiastically mentioned the resident landscape architect was designing the floral installations. The thought of seeing him in that context amidst her world sent a frisson of dread and something perilously close to anticipation through her. The night arrived. Elena descended to the transformed lobby, a vision in midnight blue silk that flowed like liquid shadow over her curves, cut with razor-sharp precision. Diamonds glittered coldly at her ears and throat. Her hair was swept into a severe, elegant knot, exposing the sharp line of her jaw and the sculpted column of her neck. She was power incarnate, radiating an aura of chilled command. The lobby buzzed with the city's elite, but a hush seemed to follow her as she moved through the crowd, a sleek predator amongst peacocks. And then she saw him. He was near the grand staircase, adjusting a towering arrangement of white orchids and trailing jasmine vines. He wasn't in a tuxedo, but in well-cut dark trousers and a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing strong forearms dusted with fine golden hair. A leather apron was tied loosely around his waist, smudged with green. He looked utterly out of place amidst the diamonds and designer gowns, yet radiantly, authentically present. His focus was entirely on the flowers, his large, capable hands gently coaxing a stray vine into place, his expression one of absorbed concentration. The warm light from the crystal chandeliers caught the gold in his hair, the earnest line of his profile. He looked beautiful, not polished, but vibrantly, unself-consciously alive. Elena stopped dead. The noise of the gala, the clinking glasses, the vapid chatter, the string quartet, faded into a dull roar.
Her carefully constructed world narrowed to a single point. Leo Hart, bathed in light, tending his blooms with a tenderness that stole her breath. The ice fortress trembled, fissures spreading with alarming speed. She felt a wave of heat rush through her, entirely at odds with her cool exterior. Her pulse hammered against the confines of her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in ice. As if sensing the weight of her gaze, he looked up. His clear blue eyes scanned the crowd, searching, and then locked directly onto hers. The connection was instantaneous, electric, a silent detonation in the crowded room. Time seemed to warp, stretch, and snap. In his eyes, she saw startled recognition, then a dawning warmth, an unmistakable flicker of pure, unguarded admiration, and beneath it, a spark of desire that mirrored the terrifying heat coiling low in her own belly. It wasn't the sycophantic look she was used to, it was appreciation, raw and honest, seeing her Elena, beneath the armor of silk and diamonds. Panic, sharp and primal, seized her. It was too much. The intensity of his gaze, the vulnerability of her own reaction, the sheer publicness of this silent exchange, it threatened to shatter her completely. Her mask, the one she'd spent weeks reforging, slipped. For a split second, raw, panicked hunger flashed across her face, a desperate longing she hadn't even fully admitted to herself. She saw it reflected in the widening of his eyes, the slight parting of his lips. No, the command screamed through her mind. Control. Regain control. With a force of will that felt like tearing her own skin, she slammed the mask back into place. Her expression iced over, becoming remote, imperious, utterly unreadable. She turned away from him so sharply, so decisively, that the champagne flute in her hand tilted precariously, golden liquid sloshing perilously close to the rim. She didn't spill it. Elena Vance did not spill things, but the near miss was a physical manifestation of her inner earthquake. She moved blindly through the crowd, a smile fixed on her lips that didn't reach her eyes, exchanging meaningless pleasantries on autopilot. The diamonds felt cold and heavy, the silk a suffocating shroud. She needed air, real air, space, escape. Excusing herself with glacial politeness, she headed not for the exit, but for the one place she instinctively associated with the only peace she'd felt in weeks, the building's rooftop garden, Leo's domain. Pushing through the heavy access door, she stepped into another world. The cacophony of the gala vanished, replaced by the soft sigh of the night breeze and the distant murmur of the city. Moonlight, cool and silvery, bathed the rooftop oasis Leo had created. Lush greenery formed shadowy shapes. Pathways of smooth riverstones gleamed faintly. The air was thick, intoxicating, with the perfume of night-blooming jasmine, stronger, sweeter here than it had ever drifted up to her balcony. The rhythmic splash of a small fountain provided a constant, soothing counterpoint. It was serene, magical, utterly removed from the glittering pressure cooker below. Elena walked to the edge, gripping the cool metal railing, her knuckles white. She stared out at the endless sea of city lights, drawing in deep, shaky breaths, trying to quell the frantic pounding of her heart. The image of Leo's face, the look in his eyes, admiration, desire, the shock at her raw reaction, burned behind her eyelids. She felt exposed, flayed open. The carefully reconstructed ice was cracking, melting under an internal heat she could no longer deny. She didn't hear the rooftop door open softly behind her. She didn't register the soft footfall on the turf. But she felt it, a shift in the air, a presence, warmth, solidarity. He didn't speak. He simply approached, his steps measured, unhurried, stopping a mere breath away. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, a tangible force against the cool night air, and the chill of her own terror. The scent of him, earth, jasmine, and something uniquely male, enveloped her, more potent than any perfume. Elena remained rigid, her back to him, staring blindly at the city. Her shoulders trembled minutely, the only outward sign of the earthquake within. Every nerve ending screamed. She felt him behind her, a silent, waiting storm. The tension was exquisite, agonizing, thick enough to choke on. She heard his soft inhale, felt the slight disturbance in the air as his hand lifted, not to grasp, not to demand, to hover, near her bare upper arm, exposed by the sleeveless dress, inches away. The anticipation was a physical ache, a pull stronger than gravity. Her control, stretched to its absolute limit, frayed. The dam holding back the flood of forbidden feeling groaned, fissures spiderwebbing through the ice. Her resolve, hardened over decades, felt suddenly brittle, insubstantial. She felt the warmth of his palm radiating towards her skin. A promise, a question, a tremor, violent and uncontrollable, racked her frame. She couldn't breathe. The scent of jasmine, the heat of him, the memory of his kindness, the raw honesty in his eyes. It was too much. The final brick in her fortress dislodged, without conscious thought. Driven by a need deeper than pride or fear, she leaned back, just an inch, an infinitesimal surrender, into the space where his heat resided, where his hand hovered. It wasn't an embrace, but an offering, a silent plea. His fingertips brushed her skin. The contact was feather-light, the barest graze against the cool, smooth surface of her upper arm. Yet it sent a jolt of pure electricity through her, so intense it stole her breath. A sharp, involuntary gasp escaped her lips, echoing in the moonlit stillness. He turned her then, slowly, gently, his other hand coming up to cradle her elbow. The world tilted. She found herself facing him, moonlight etching the planes of his face, catching the startling blue of his eyes, now dark with an intensity that mirrored her own. His gaze held hers, searching, reflecting the frantic drumming of her heart, the raw, unspoken need she could no longer hide. No words, just shared breath, warm and mingling in the cool air, the frantic pulse visible at the base of his throat, the universe narrowing to the point where his skin met hers. His free hand rose, impossibly slow, towards her face. She didn't flinch, she couldn't move. His thumb brushed her cheekbone, a touch so devastatingly tender, it shattered the last remnants of her icy resolve. It was reverence, it was discovery, it was an answer to a question she hadn't dared ask. Her fortress collapsed, not with a roar, but with a sigh. The ice melted, flooding her with a warmth that was terrifying and exhilarating. She didn't think. She surged forward, closing the minuscule distance, meeting his lips with her own. It wasn't a kiss of gentle exploration. It was desperate, starving, a collision, a consummation of weeks of denied tension, of stolen glances, of phantom scents and unbearable heat. His lips were warm, surprisingly soft, yielding yet demanding. He met her hunger with his own, his arms sliding around her waist, pulling her flush against him. The leather apron was rough against the thin silk of her dress, the heat of his body beneath it searing. The scent of jasmine, turpentine and pure Leo overwhelmed her senses. His hand tangled in the hair at her nape, dislodging pins, while the other pressed firmly against the small of her back, anchoring her. The cool night air, the distant city sounds, the rustle of leaves, everything faded. There was only the heat, the taste of him, mint and something indefinably earthy, the solid strength of his body against hers, the frantic beating of their hearts sinking into a single pounding rhythm. The sculpture had not just felt the sun, it had been plunged into a forge, and the ice didn't just melt, it vaporized in the sudden, all-consuming blaze. The controlled Tycoon was lost, swept away by the forbidden warmth of the sapling, and in that moon-drenched rooftop garden, amidst the heady perfume of night blooms, Elena Vance surrendered completely to the terrifying, exhilarating pull of Leo Hart.
Chapter 3. The world didn't right itself after the rooftop. It tilted, spun, and reformed around the searing imprint of Leo's mouth on hers, the crushing pressure of his arms, the devastating tenderness of his thumb on her cheekbone. Elena Vance, the woman who commanded boardrooms with a glacial stare, stood trembling in the moon-drenched garden, her lips swollen, her breath ragged gasps tearing the perfumed air, her diamond earrings askew. The fortress wasn't just breached, it lay in smoldering ruins around her feet, and the conqueror wasn't a hostile takeover, but a landscape architect smelling of jasmine and turpentine. Leo stood before her, his chest rising and falling rapidly, his eyes dark sapphires in the moonlight, holding hers with an intensity that stole the breath she'd just regained. His lips, slightly parted, glistened. A strand of sandy hair, dislodged in their collision, fell across his forehead. He looked as shattered as she felt, yet grounded, rooted in the earth beneath their feet. The leather apron was rough against her silk-clad stomach, where he still held her, one hand possessively splayed on the small of her back, the other tangled in the unraveling knot of her hair. "Elena," he breathed, her name a rough caress on the night air, unfamiliar and terrifyingly intimate without the formality of Miss Vance. It wasn't a question, but a statement, a claiming. She couldn't speak. Words were jagged shards in her throat. Her mind, usually a whirring supercomputer of strategy and control, was white noise, static punctuated only by the frantic drumming of her pulse against her ribs and the lingering, electric memory of his kiss. Starving, that's what it had felt like. A desperate, primal devouring after weeks of famine. Shame warred with a terrifying exhilaration, a molten heat pooling low in her belly that threatened to liquefy her knees. He must have sensed her imminent collapse, the way the rigid control was replaced by a terrifying vulnerability. His grip shifted, subtly supportive, his thumb rubbing a small, unconscious circle against her back. "Look at me," he murmured, his voice low, resonant, vibrating through the hand still cradling her head. Her gaze, which had skittered away to the shadowed leaves of a nearby magnolia, snapped back to his. The raw hunger she saw reflected there, mingled with a dawning wonder, mirrored her own chaotic storm. It was terrifying. Liberating, liberating. "You kissed me," he stated, a faint, incredulous curve touching his lips. Not an accusation, a revelation. The bluntness, the sheer unexpectedness of it, startled a choked sound from her, half laugh, half sob. "You touched me first," she managed, her voice raspy, unused, the words sounding absurdly childish in the charged silence. Yet they held a kernel of truth, a tiny anchor in the maelstrom. His touch had been the detonator. A slow, devastating smile spread across his face, crinkling the corners of his eyes, transforming the intensity into something warmer, infinitely more dangerous. "A brush," he countered, his thumb drifting from her back to trace the sensitive skin just above the low neckline of her dress. The touch sent fresh sparks skittering across her nerves, hardly an invitation for. His gaze dipped pointedly to her lips. The flush that had been creeping up her neck engulfed her face. Flirtation, banter, this was uncharted territory. Her interactions were negotiations, directives, icy pronouncements, not this playful, dangerous dance. Yet a spark ignited within the wreckage, a defiant ember. "It was a remarkably potent brush, Mr. Hart," she retorted, forcing a semblance of her usual coolness into her tone, though it trembled at the edges. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze with a challenge she didn't entirely feel. One might consider it reckless. His chuckle was a low rumble against her, felt more than heard. "Reckless?" He leaned in infinitesimally closer, his breath warm against her temple. "Or perhaps inspired?" His gaze held hers, the blue depth swirling with amusement and something hotter, darker. Considering the spectacular result, the air crackled. The scent of night-blooming jasmine was suddenly cloying, intoxicating. The memory of the kiss, the feel of his body against hers, flooded back with visceral intensity. Elena felt the treacherous warmth spread, the defiant ember threatening to become a conflagration. She needed space, air that wasn't saturated with him, yet pulling away felt like tearing her own skin. "Result," she echoed, arching an eyebrow, a gesture perfected in boardrooms that felt strangely incongruous here, with his hand tracing idle patterns on her back. "I believe the jury is still out on whether that constituted a result or a catastrophic miscalculation." His smile widened, a flash of white teeth in the moonlight. He was enjoying this, enjoying her disarray. The realization sent another jolt through her, part outrage, part thrilling surrender. Catastrophic. He feigned offense, his hand sliding up her back to gently disentangle the remaining pins from her hair. The dark cascade tumbled down, a silken curtain against her bare shoulders. I recall a distinct lack of screaming or fleeing. In fact, his voice dropped to a conspiratorial murmur, his lips hovering dangerously close to her ear. There seemed to be a significant amount of enthusiastic participation. Heat flooded her cheeks anew. He was right. She had participated, wholeheartedly, devastatingly. The admission, even unspoken, was a surrender. She looked away, her gaze catching on the discarded leather apron lying on the turf where it had fallen, a symbol of his world, rough and earthy, colliding with her midnight silk. The absurdity, the sheer impossibility of it all, crashed over her. Leo, his name felt foreign, intimate, dangerous on her tongue. This, she gestured vaguely between them, encompassing the moonlit garden, the lingering heat, the shattered remains of her self-control. "This is impossible." He stilled, the playful glint in his eyes softening into something more serious, more probing. His hand cupped her jaw, gently turning her face back to his. "Why?" The single word held the weight of genuine curiosity, devoid of challenge, just a quiet seeking of truth. The reasons lined up in her mind, cold and logical. CEO and resident, power imbalance, different worlds, scandal, her carefully constructed life, Robert's betrayal, her own terrifying capacity for loss of control. 1,000 reasons, she whispered, the fight draining out of her, replaced by a bone-deep weariness and the terrifying pull of his warmth. "It's complicated." He studied her face, his thumb brushing lightly over the pulse fluttering wildly at the base of her throat. "Complicated," he repeated slowly, tasting the word. A thoughtful frown touched his brow. Then a slow, understanding smile dawned. "Ah, you mean like..." He glanced around at the meticulously planned chaos of his rooftop garden, the winding paths, the unexpected bursts of color, the demanding orchids thriving beside hardy succulents, like coaxing a moonflower to bloom in the heart of the city, or balancing acidity in soil for rare camellias. His gaze returned to hers, steady, warm. "Complicated isn't impossible, Elena. It just requires attention, patience, the right conditions." His thumb traced her lower lip, a feather-light caress that made her breath hitch. And sometimes, a little reckless inspiration. His words, wrapped in the metaphor of his world, disarmed her. It wasn't dismissal, it was an offer, an acknowledgement of the chasm, coupled with a quiet confidence in his ability to bridge it. The defiance flared again, mingled with a terrifying hope. "Patience isn't my strongest virtue, Mr. Hart," she admitted, the ghost of a smile touching her own lips. "Leo," he corrected softly, insistently, "and I have plenty to spare." He leaned in, his lips brushing her temple this time, a kiss so tender it threatened to undo her completely.
For something this spectacularly complicated, he didn't kiss her again on the lips, not then. Instead, he took her hand, his large warm palm engulfing hers, callous skin against her smoothness. "Come on," he said, his voice rough with emotion she couldn't decipher. "It's cold, and you're shivering." He led her, not towards the rooftop exit, but deeper into his green sanctuary, towards a small sheltered alcove partially hidden by a curtain of trailing ivy. A wrought iron bench, softened by faded cushions, sat beside the softly splashing fountain. He sat first, pulling her gently down beside him. The cushions yielded, the scent of damp earth and crushed mint rising from them. The moonlight filtered through the ivy, dappling their skin. He kept her hand clasped firmly in his thumb tracing slow circles on her knuckles. The silence that descended wasn't awkward, it was thick with unspoken things, charged with the aftershocks of their kiss, and the fragile new connection humming between them. The distant sounds of the gala were completely gone, replaced by the rhythmic splash of water and the rustle of leaves in the night breeze. Elena leaned her head back against the cool iron of the bench, closing her eyes. The exhaustion, emotional and physical, was profound, yet beneath it, a strange sense of peace. A suspension of the relentless pressure, here, in this hidden bower, with the scent of Leo surrounding her and his hand anchoring hers. The thousand reasons felt distant, muffled. She felt seen, not as Elena Vance, the Tycoon, but as Elena, the woman who had cracked, who had kissed him with desperate hunger. "Tell me something," Leo said softly, after a long while, his voice a rumble in the quiet. "Something real, not about Vance Industries, not about the gala, something just yours." The request was disarming, personal, intrusive, yet in the cocoon of the garden, with his thumb still tracing circles on her skin, it felt like an offering of trust. She opened her eyes, looking up at the sliver of star-dusted sky visible through the ivy. What did she have that was just hers? Her life was the company, the pressure, the carefully curated image. Then a memory surfaced, unbidden, fragile. She began, her voice hesitant. "When I was a girl, maybe 10, I wanted to be a ballerina." The admission felt absurd, almost shameful. "Not seriously, but for one summer, I begged my mother for lessons. She indulged me." A faint wry smile touched her lips. "I was terrible, all limbs and no grace. I tripped over my own feet more than I danced." But, in the studio, with the piano playing, she trailed off, the memory hazy but warm. There was a feeling of lightness, of possibility. Before everything got heavy, she glanced at him, suddenly self-conscious. "Ridiculous, I know." Leo's gaze was fixed on her face, intense, absorbing every word. There was no mockery in his eyes, only a deep, quiet understanding. "Not ridiculous," he said firmly. He lifted their joined hands, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was startlingly tender, intimate. "Grace isn't always about steps, Elena. Sometimes it's about standing tall when the ground feels like it's giving way." He held her gaze. "You have a different kind of grace, a fierce one. I saw it tonight, walking into that room, like a storm contained." He paused, a thoughtful look crossing his face. "Though I must admit, the image of you attempting pirouettes is..." A startled laugh escaped her, genuine and light, surprising them both. "Charming. I believe the instructor used the word disaster-prone. See?" Leo grinned, the playful glint returning. "Even then, you were making an impact, leaving a memorable impression." He squeezed her hand. "I like it. The idea of a tiny Elena determinedly tripping towards grace." The banter flowed easier now, a tentative bridge over the chasm of their differences. They talked in hushed tones as the moon arced across the sky. He told her about growing up on a struggling farm, about the solace he found in the wild patches of woods, about his first disastrous attempt at sculpting topiary that ended up looking like a drunken bear. His stories were filled with self-deprecating humor and a deep, abiding love for the natural world, a world she realized she'd only ever viewed from 30 stories up, as scenery. She found herself sharing fragments, the pressure of taking over Vance Industries too young after her father's sudden death, the constant vigilance required, the loneliness of the summit, not the boardroom battles, but the quiet wait. He listened, truly listened, his thumb a constant soothing presence on her hand, his blue eyes reflecting the moonlight and her words. Hours seemed to slip by, measured by the fountain's rhythm and the shifting shadows. The initial desperate heat of the kiss had banked into a deeper, warmer glow, a connection forged in vulnerability and unexpected understanding. The garden felt like a world apart, suspended in time. Eventually the chill of the night air began to seep through the thin silk of her dress. She shivered involuntarily. Leo noticed immediately. "You're cold." It wasn't a question. He stood, pulling her up with him. "Come on, I'll walk you to your door." He kept her hand in his as they walked through the moonlit paths back towards the rooftop access door. The silence now was comfortable, companionable, charged with the new awareness thrumming between them. At the heavy metal door leading back into the building, he paused. The transition loomed, from the magic of the garden back to the reality of the penthouse, of their separate lives. Elena felt a pang of loss, a reluctance to let go of the fragile bubble. Leo turned to face her, his expression serious in the dim light spilling from the stairwell. He cupped her face in both hands, his touch warm and sure. Complicated, he murmured, echoing her earlier word. His thumbs brushed her cheekbones. But not impossible, Elena. He leaned in, his lips brushing hers, not with the desperate hunger of before, but with a soft, lingering promise. A seal on the hours spent in the garden, on the connection forged. We'll figure it out. One reckless brush at a time, if necessary. He kissed her again, softly, deeply, leaving her breathless and anchored all at once. Then, with a final squeeze of her hand, he opened the door. "Good night, Elena. Good night, Leo," she whispered, her voice thick with unspoken emotion. She walked up the stairs alone, the sterile fluorescent lights a harsh contrast to the moonlit garden. The scent of jasmine and turpentine clung to her skin and hair, a tangible reminder of him. Her silk dress felt like a costume, the diamonds heavy relics. When she reached her penthouse door, she paused, looking back down the empty stairwell. The fortress was gone. In its place was a landscape transformed, fissured but fertile, waiting for new growth. And standing squarely in the center of that landscape, his roots already delving deep into the cracks he'd created, was Leo Hart. The controlled Tycoon hadn't just kissed the landscape architect. She'd ignited a fire that threatened to consume her carefully ordered world. And the terrifying, exhilarating truth was, she no longer wanted to put it out. The complicated, reckless, spectacular journey had truly begun.
Chapter 4. The sterile hush of Elena Vance's penthouse was no longer absolute. It was punctuated now by the soft rustle of leaves from a vibrant orchid perched defiantly on her chrome desk, by the faint rhythmic ticking of an old-fashioned mantel clock Leo had insisted looked lonely in his studio and would feel more at home with her brigette, a ridiculous notion she'd secretly cherished, and most profoundly by the lingering scent of cedarwood, turpentine, and Leo that seemed to have permeated the very air. The fortress hadn't been rebuilt, it had been terraformed. Obsidian remained, but now veined with warm mahogany, softened by unexpected greenery. The world outside hadn't magically smoothed over. The hostile takeover threat against Vance Industries loomed like a thunderhead on the horizon, demanding her sharpest intellect, her coldest strategy. Yet walking into the Vance Tower lobby, the Monday after the rooftop felt fundamentally different. The air didn't smell just of ink and ambition. It carried a phantom whisper of jasmine, a grounding note of earth. Her stride was still commanding, her gaze still assessing, but the edges felt integrated, less like shards of ice, more like polished stone, warmed by the sun. Her assistant, Marcus, blinked, a flicker of surprise crossing his face before he launched into the day's brutal schedule. "You look rested, Miss Vance." A ghost of a smile touched Elena's lips. Rested wasn't the word. Alive, terrified, exhilarated, consumed. "It was a productive weekend, Marcus," she replied, her voice retaining its authority, but lacking its former glacial edge. She swept past the reception desk, where a single, perfect white camellia, Leo's morning offering, sat in a slender vase, a silent, potent declaration amidst the corporate chrome. Long hours bled into tense evenings, filled with conference calls, dissecting financials, anticipating moves. Yet Elena found reservoirs of calm she hadn't known existed. During a particularly fraught strategy session, her CFO droned on about shareholder panic. Her fingers, usually steepled in icy contemplation, drifted to the pocket of her tailored blazer. Inside, folded with care, was a quick pencil sketch Leo had made of her that Sunday morning, asleep on his worn sofa, sunlight striping her face, her expression unguarded, peaceful. The lines were confident, capturing not just her features, but a profound tenderness. She traced the edge of the paper with her thumb, hidden beneath the table. The panic in the room didn't vanish, but it lost its power to freeze her. She straightened, her voice cutting through the anxiety with renewed tempered steel. "Panic is a luxury we cannot afford, David. Present the counteroffer analysis." Now, the talisman worked. Her escape wasn't the empty penthouse balcony anymore. It was descending one floor, pushing open the door to Leo's apartment without knocking, a liberty that still sent a thrill through her, and stepping into his vibrant chaos. The scent of oil paint, damp earth, and simmering garlic welcomed her like a physical embrace. One evening, she found him at his scarred wooden table, meticulously sketching the intricate veins of a monstera leaf, his brow furrowed in concentration. She leaned against the doorframe, watching the play of muscle in his forearm, the way his sandy hair fell across his forehead. Contemplating defecting to botany textbooks. "Mr. Hart?" she inquired, her voice laced with amusement. He glanced up, those lake blue eyes warming instantly. "Trying to capture the sheer audacity of this leaf, Miss Vance. Look at it," he gestured with his pencil, throwing shade like it owns the place, completely unapologetic about taking up half my studio. He tilted his head, a slow grin spreading. "Reminds me of someone." Elena arched an imperious eyebrow, stepping further into the room. "I assure you, my shade-throwing is far more strategic and considerably less leafy." "Debatable," Leo countered, pushing his chair back. He stood, crossing the space between them in 2 strides. His hands settled on her waist, warm and sure, through the thin silk of her blouse, and far more captivating. He dipped his head, his lips brushing hers in a greeting that had become as essential as breathing. "Long day, Tycoon." "The usual corporate blood sport," she murmured against his lips, leaning into his solid warmth, the tension of the boardroom melting under his touch, made bearable only by the prospect of witnessing your ongoing battle with foliage. "Ah, but I conquered the audacious leaf," he declared, pulling back slightly, his eyes dancing. "Now I have a far more challenging project." He tugged her gently towards the small kitchen area, where an array of unfamiliar vegetables lay chopped, introducing the formidable Elena Vance to the art of... "Is this your subtle way of suggesting my culinary skills are incendiary?" Leo laughed, the sound rich and warm in the cozy space. "Perish the thought. Consider it cultural exchange. You navigate hostile takeovers, I navigate hot oil. Both require nerves of steel and impeccable timing." He handed her a wooden spoon. "Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to stir these peppers gently while I tackle the temperamental ginger." It was messy. Oil spattered. Elena, used to commanding complex financial instruments, found the simple act of stirring vegetables surprisingly fraught. "Is it supposed to make that noise?" she demanded, eyeing the sizzling wok like it might explode. "Only if you're doing it right," Leo assured her, deftly adding slivers of garlic that released an intoxicating aroma. He nudged her shoulder playfully with his. "Relax, Commander. It's just dinner, not a merger negotiation." Though he added, leaning close, his breath warm on her ear, "If you char the peppers, there will be consequences." "Oh," Elena turned her head, their faces inches apart. The sizzle of the wok faded beneath the sudden crackle of tension. "What sort of consequences, Gardner?" His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes, a slow, heated smile curving his mouth. "Severe ones, possibly involving dishwashing duty." For a week, he brushed a stray lock of hair from her forehead, his callous thumb grazing her temple. Or worse, no dessert. The flirtation was effortless now, a playful dance woven into the fabric of their days. It lived in the shared glances across a crowded lobby, the brush of his hand against the small of her back as they navigated a charity event, his presence at her side now a quiet, unapologetic fact, the way he'd murmur outrageous gardening metaphors into her hair when she was trying to read a contract. It was a language born of intimacy and shared secrets, a constant warm undercurrent beneath the surface of their complicated lives. The takeover threat reached its zenith. A crucial board meeting was called, the air thick with tension, thicker than the fog outside the Vance Tower windows. Investors were jittery, analysts sharpened their claws, and her most formidable rival sat opposite her, a smirk playing on his lips. Elena sat at the head of the imposing table, the weight of the company pressing down. Her usual armor felt different, not colder but denser, more resilient. As the arguments flew, accusations sharp as knives, her hand slipped into her blazer pocket once more. The edges of Leo's sketch pressed against her fingertips. She thought not of the sleeping woman it depicted, but of him that morning, handing her a travel mug of strong coffee, his eyes serious. "Remember," he'd said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through her, "roots hold firm in the storm. You're the oldest oak in this forest, Elena. They're just wind." He'd kissed her, hard and quick, a silent infusion of his unwavering belief. Drawing a deep breath, she pulled her hand from her pocket, placing it flat on the polished table. She didn't need the sketch visible. Its strength was inside her now, woven into her resolve. She met her rival's gaze, not with icy fury, but with a calm, unwavering certainty that radiated from a core fused with something stronger than steel. She presented her counter-strategy, not just aggressive, but innovative, ethical, rooted in the company's long-term health. A subtle influence of Leo's perspective on sustainable growth she hadn't even realized had seeped in. Her voice, clear and resonant, cut through the doubt. She saw the flicker of uncertainty in her rival's eyes, the grudging respect from a previously wavering board member. The tide turned, not with a roar, but with the quiet, inevitable shift of deeply anchored earth.
When the vote was called, her victory was decisive. The storm hadn't broken her, she'd absorbed it, transformed by the quiet fire that burned steadily within. Leaving the boardroom, the adrenaline still singing in her veins, she didn't head for her office. She took the private elevator down, walked through the bustling lobby past the now familiar camellia, and stepped out into the late afternoon sun. She didn't call a car. She walked the few blocks to the community garden project Leo had designed, a venture Vance Industries had quietly funded. She found him kneeling in the rich soil, showing a group of children how to gently transplant seedlings. He looked up as her shadow fell across the plot, his face breaking into a smile that outshone the sun. He stood, wiping his earthy hands on his jeans, ignoring the curious glances of the volunteers. "Tycoon," he greeted, his voice warm with pride and something deeper. He didn't ask about the meeting. He saw the quiet triumph in her eyes, the relaxed set of her shoulders. "Fancy meeting you in the dirt. Merely inspecting my investment, Mr. Hart," she replied, her tone haughty, but her eyes softened as she took in the vibrant patch of green thriving amidst the concrete, the children's eager faces. "It appears to be yielding satisfactory results." She stepped closer, deliberately onto the soft earth bordering the path. "Just satisfactory." Leo feigned offense, closing the distance. He reached out, not caring about the watching eyes, and gently brushed a smudge of city grime from her cheekbone, a gesture that spoke volumes. "I was aiming for spectacular." His gaze held hers, the blue depths reflecting the late sun, and her own quiet joy. Heard the wind died down upstairs. "It encountered an immovable object," Elena murmured, a genuine smile, rare and radiant, touching her lips. The victory felt sweeter, shared in this space he'd created, surrounded by burgeoning life. "Your oak metaphor held." "Told you," he said softly, his thumb lingering near her jawline. "Strong roots." He glanced down at her pristine heels, sinking slightly into the soft earth. "Though next time, maybe wear boots if you're planning an inspection." City shoes weren't designed for guerrilla gardening. Guerrilla gardening? Elena arched an eyebrow, a playful challenge sparking. "Is that what we're calling your attempts to civilize this urban jungle?" "Attempts." Leo swept an arm dramatically over the thriving plot. "Look at this. Order emerging from chaos. Beauty from neglect." He leaned in conspiratorially, much like a certain tycoon I know, thawing out beautifully. She swatted his arm lightly, a laugh escaping her, a sound that still surprised her with its ease. "Careful, gardener. Flattery will get you nowhere, except perhaps," she added, her gaze dropping meaningfully to his lips, then back to his eyes, assigned to weeding the penthouse balcony. "Indefinitely." His grin was wolfish. "Promises, promises, Miss Vance. Though I must warn you, I have a very hands-on approach to weeding." The double entendre hung in the warm air, charged with their familiar intimate heat. A child giggled nearby, breaking the spell, but the connection thrummed between them, visible in their locked gaze, the slight flush on Elena's cheeks. Later, back in her transformed penthouse, the city lights glittering like scattered diamonds below, Elena stood not alone on the balcony, but wrapped in Leo's arms. His chin rested on the top of her head, his warmth a solid anchor against her back. The cool marble beneath her feet no longer felt frigid. The silence wasn't empty. It was filled with the rhythm of their breathing, the distant hum of the city, the profound quiet of belonging. "It's different," she murmured, leaning back into his embrace, watching the lights, the view. Leo tightened his arms around her waist, his lips brushing her temple. "How so?" Before she paused, searching for the words. It was a kingdom, something to be controlled, dominated. Lines on a map. She turned slightly in his arms, looking up at him. Moonlight silvered his profile, caught the earnest blue of his eyes. "Now, it feels like possibility, something shared." He smiled, a slow, tender curve. "Maybe it's not the view that changed," he suggested, his thumb tracing idle circles on her hip bone through the silk of her robe. "Maybe it's the vantage point." He dipped his head, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was slow, deep, and spoke of home. It was a kiss that held the memory of rooftop surrender, the shared laughter over stir-fry disasters, the quiet strength drawn in a boardroom storm, the simple joy of dirt under fingernails and children's laughter. It was a kiss that consumed, not with wildfire, but with the steady, enduring warmth of banked coals. When they finally pulled apart, breath mingling in the cool air, Elena rested her forehead against his. The orchid on her desk glowed softly in the dim light from the living room. The old clock ticked a comforting rhythm beside Leo's sketch on the mantel. The scent of cedarwood and jasmine was a permanent welcome resident. "Complicated worked," she whispered, the words a testament, a surrender, a victory. Leo's chuckle was a soft vibration against her. "Spectacularly," he agreed, his voice rough with emotion. He kissed her forehead, and the best part, Tycoon. He pulled back just enough to meet her gaze, his eyes holding the reflection of the city lights and her own transformed face. "The weeds are just getting started," she laughed, the sound echoing softly on the balcony, a melody of warmth in the vastness of the night. "The ruthless Tycoon and the gentle gardener. the controlled sculpture, and the vital sapling. Their worlds hadn't merged seamlessly, they had reshaped each other, creating a new fertile landscape where power was tempered by tenderness, control yielded to connection, and the most unexpected love had taken root, deep and unshakable. The fire hadn't destroyed, it had forged, and in the quiet glow of their shared balcony, overlooking the city they both inhabited in profoundly different, yet irrevocably linked ways, Elena Vance knew she wouldn't trade the complicated, consuming warmth of Leo Hart for all the sterile control in the world. The quiet fire was all she needed,